This lab is on the lymphatic system. I'm going to show you the pictures in the lab book first, then I'm going to show you extra pictures after it. The lymphatic system returns fluid that is lost from circulation. So we have this capillary bed here losing fluid to the circulatory system, and it filters that fluid for pathogens. So the capillary bed here, it leaks fluid. One textbook I've read says it leaks 9 liters a day. You only have about 5 liters of blood total, so you need to return that fluid. Fortunately, most of the fluid comes back into the capillary bed by albumin. 10% stays in extracellular fluid, and it could lead to edema. Therefore, the lymphatic system takes in or sucks in that extra plasma that's leaked out and returns it to the circulatory system. And when I said the capillary bed leaks, it leaks blood plasma. The blood cells stay in the capillary bed. So, this is a lymph capillary. It's in the capillary bed, and lymph comes in, and it drains, and it goes into a lymphatic vessel. The lymphatic vessels bring lymph back to the circulatory system. Every so often on the lymphatic vessel, there's a lymph node. And the lymph node is a checkpoint. The lymph comes into the lymph node on these afferent lymph vessels coming from the capillaries, and it basically drains through the lymph node and out through an efferent vessel. Now, lymph nodes are encapsulated organs, so there's a capsule on the outside, and they're divided into a cortex and a medulla. You have these lymph nodules in the cortex. The lymph nodules are made out of B cells, T cells, and monocytes or macrophages. And they're filtering, they're checking, are there any bad guys in this lymph? Is there any debris in this lymph? And the lymph travels around these lymph nodules through these lymph trabeculae. So the cortex out here has lymph nodules that have blood cells, and then trabeculae. In the middle here are medullary cords made up of reticular tissue. You have lymphocytes attached to that, so they too are filtering and checking the blood for pathogens. The lymph travels through, so it goes to the trabeculae, it goes to the medulla, goes out an efferent vessel. The efferent vessel is found on the side that has a hilum. This hilum is a concave region, and vessels enter and leave. This is our first hilum. We'll encounter many others. Lymph vessels are going to drain into these lymphatic trunks, which will drain into these lymphatic ducts. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about location of lymph nodes. You have lymph nodes all over, so here are some around the ear, but they're especially distributed around the neck, which are your cervical lymph nodes, the axillary region, which are your axillary, your mediastinal, which are in the middle of your thoracic cavity, and your inguinal region, which is not on this picture. So that's why your neck swells up when you get sick. So again, lymph vessels, the small white ones, go into these lymphatic trunks. And the cervical trunks are draining your neck. The jugular trunks are draining from your neck. Your subclavian trunks are draining from your arms. And they drain into these lymph ducts. This is the right lymph duct, that little tiny thing right there. This is the thoracic duct, which is coming from your abdomen. What's not shown on here is the bronchial mediastinal lymph trunk. That is draining the thoracic cage. Now, down here on this picture, we have the other trunks. We have the intestinal trunk. This is the only unpaired one. It's taking lymph from the intestines, and it also is taking fat. So it's going to have a milky white appearance. And then you have the lumbar trunks. The lumbar trunks, I don't like the name of. Everything else is basically similar to a vein, and suddenly we get lumbar. And there are the inguinal nodes. Now the intestinal trunk and the lumbar trunk, they're going to drain into this thing called the cisterna chyli, and that drains into the thoracic duct, which the left subclavian, the left jugular, and the left bronchial mediastinal all drain into. So this right one, it really is pathetic because you only have the right jugular, the right subclavian, and the right bronchial mediastinal draining into that. This is part of our intestinal model. It shows a lacteal, which is a specialized lymphatic capillary in the intestines and straining into lymph vessels right here. So I might ask you those structures on the test. And then this is a lymph nodule. It's actually called a Peyer's patch. I think Dr. Payer should get to keep his patches, but they're trying to call these lymph nodules now, so either is an acceptable answer. Tonsils are part of the lymphatic system. You have 3 sets of tonsils. You have the pharyngeal tonsils behind your nasal cavity. So this is the nasal cavity right here. Let's scroll up a little bit. So this is the nasal cavity. This is the nasopharynx. This is the oropharynx. So air comes in, and it gets filtered by the pharyngeal tonsils. This is the uvula right here. That will actually close up. So it's above the uvula. That's the thing hanging down the back of your mouth. The other 2 sets are the palatine tonsils and the lingual tonsils. The palatine tonsils are the ones you see when you're sick. They're found in the oropharynx. And then the lingual tonsils are underneath your tongue. Hopefully you do not see those when you're sick because it's probably blocking your mouth right here. So you're going to look at histology of the lymphatic vessels. And the lymph vessels have valves. So this is a valve going across this lymph vessel right here, and this is lymph. You have some simple squamous epithelial as the intima, and on this lymph vessel you just have the adventitia around the outside. Some of the larger vessels may have a muscular layer, a very thin muscular layer. I've seen some textbooks calling them very similar to small veins, but this is what our histology slide looks like. This is our lymph node histology slide. Like I said, it has a capsule, and it has lymph nodules here in the cortex. The nodules have a geminal center that's lighter in color than the outer part. They do not have a cortex or a medulla, though. So this is the cortex right here. It's darker. Here's the medulla with the medullary cords, and you have lymphocytes attached on that. The trabeculae are gaps between the lymph nodules. So this is a nodule. It is found in the lymph node, in the intestines, in the appendix, and other parts of the lymphatic system. This is my favorite histology slide, or one of my favorite. It is part of the intestines called the ileum. And the reason I like it, it has lots of these very obvious lymph nodules called Peyer's patches or intestinal nodules. I say let Dr. Payer keep his patches. They're cool. I like his name. So it has a geminal center. It has the outside. These are nodules. They don't have a cortex or a medulla. They are not encapsulated. So a node is encapsulated, a nodule is not. This is a tonsil slide. It's very similar. The tonsils have these crypts that let debris come in, and it has a capsule around it. Inside the tonsil are lots and lots of lymph nodules. Again, they have a geminal center and an outer, darker part. So here is a lymph node under very low power. It's actually projected. So here's the cortex. Here's the medulla in here, and we can't really see where the hilum is on this slide. So here's the same tonsil. So this is the medulla. This would be the cortex. Hilum probably would be right there. This is the tonsil. We can clearly see it has crypts here. And these are all the lymph nodules in it. So lymph, and notice it's bigger than the lymph node. So these are the nodules that are found inside the tonsils, and these are the crypts. This is scanning of the jejunum slide. So these are the villi, and the lymph nodules or Peyer's patches would be right here, which is a layer called the submucosal. This is the muscular layer, this is the inside. So they would be in the submucosal. Unfortunately, when I took this picture, it didn't really come out very well. So this is actually that same slide on a microscope now. So these are where those villi were. This is the Peyer's patch, so this in the submucosal layer. And since I'm here, I might as well show you the spleen. The spleen is made up of white pulp, which this would be, and red pulp, which this would be. And there's trabeculae here, holding the whole thing together. And there should be a blood vessel here. There should be blood vessels in the red pulp as well. And this spleen basically holds blood. That's what all the red pulp is. Then the white pulp is lymph nodules that have a whole bunch of white blood cells. So here, that would be white pulp. There should be a blood vessel right in the middle. That's the trabeculae. This is red pulp. I don't really... Oh, there's a nice blood vessel right there. So there's the same slide corrected. There is the blood vessel that is in the white pulp right there. There is another blood vessel in red pulp. Again, red pulp is red blood cells. White pulp is white blood cells. So that's another spleen. That is the white pulp. That is the red pulp. Unfortunately, we do not have a thymus model. It sits on the heart, and it's generally larger in children and adults. It has a couple lobes made up of smaller lobules. So this is one of the lobules making up one of the lobes of the thymus. So the thymus has two lobes with many lobules. There is a medulla on the inside and a cortex on the outside, and it has a dense, irregular connective tissue capsule around it. And you should see some fat as well. Down here's the spleen. I like this spleen right here because it shows you here's the spleen. Has a nice, beautiful ileum right there. Splenic artery coming this way. Splenic vein going that way. And again, it's made up of white pulp and red pulp. So the spleen, as I said when I was showing you that other picture, has a artery in the white pulp, and it has veins in the red pulp. And basically, blood comes through, empties from sinusoid arteries, or sinusoid capillaries from this arteriole, and it goes through the white pulp, gets filtered, and then hangs out in the red pulp until it needs to go back to circulation, and it enters through the venule here. And you should see trabecula as well. So when I was talking about the Peyer's patches, they're in this lower part of the small intestines called the ileum. And you actually have lymph nodules in the appendix, in the colon, and you have them in the esophagus too. The appendix here is actually considered a lymphatic organ because it has those nodules, and it's thought to help control the bacteria that are living in your large intestine. So this is what the appendix slide looks like, or at least our appendix slide. So we have lymph nodules, and we have a rather smooth, roughly smooth, compared to other parts of the intestine, mucosal layer. And then you have crypts that have stem cells in them. And here's a bunch of fat. Now, as I pointed out on the circulatory system video, there are veins on here. This is the temporal vein, occipital vein, facial vein, jugular vein. So I could ask you what the veins are. This is the cephalic vein. This is the outside of the arm on this one. This one, I am calling it's the brachial vein on the picture. I am not convinced it's the brachial vein. I found that on a labeled picture of this model, so I'm like, okay, it must be the brachial. The brachial vein, though, is a deep vein. The basilar vein is a superficial vein. Here are our lymphatic structures are in green pens here. So on this model, I can ask you blood vessels. I can ask you lymph vessels. There's our thoracic duct. There's the aorta right next to it. Here's our brachiocephalic vein. It should be pointed to from there. And there's the lower one. So we have our inferior vena cava, the hepatic portal vein, my favorite vein. And you have a whole bunch of mesenteric lymph nodes in here as well. There are the inguinal, there's the femoral vein, the siphoneus vein is on the side here. So again, I can ask you a lot of blood vessels on this as well. So, thank you very much.